and it's beautiful, and it's just Mosaic and the text in Hebrew, and it's clearly no question that it is a synagogue. But in the center of the Mosaic, which is the floor, the center of the synagogue, there's a zodiac, or the 12 signs of the zodiac, and in the middle, there is a portrait of God stylized as the sun god on a chariot, the way they used to, at the time would draw sun gods. And,
Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm here today with Elon Gilad. He's a writer for Haaretz, one of the major newspapers in Israel, specializing in Hebrew and Jewish history, and he's the author of a book called The Secret History of Judaism. His research focuses on the interface between biblical and modern Hebrew, with a particular interest in uncovering the origins of traditions and words. Elon shares his linguistic insights through popular TikTok videos on Hebrew etymology. He has a BA from Tel Aviv University and currently is working on a master's there. Shalom, Elon.
Hello. This is a very important thing because this often comes up, I see in the comments of my videos. A lot of, anti-Israel people, it's a made-up language, blah, 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 blah. So it's a little hard to conceptualize what we mean when we say that the Hebrew died, right? It was a living language, and it stopped being a living language, and then it was revived. So it's worth discussing what we mean by what happened. A complicated process. It's worth understanding in depth.
Explain, please.
So, first of all, in ancient times, obviously people were speaking Hebrew, right? The people who wrote the Bible, the people in the Bible, they were speaking a language. This language was very, very, very similar to the languages of their neighboring, the Edomites, and etc. They could have spoken. I don't know if they had really the idea that they're speaking different languages. You could think of it as a dialect or accent. It's very similar. But all those other peoples, they died out a lot sooner, and Jews, persevered and existed also into Hellenistic times and Roman times, and they continued speaking Hebrew. To what extent? Well, there's a gradual shift away from Hebrew and into Aramaic. Aramaic, now arcane language spoken by very few people. People study the Talmud, which is mostly written in Aramaic, but at the time, Aramaic was like English. So when the Arameans, these are people that lived in what is today Syria, these wandering people, and they die out pretty early in antiquity. But somehow the Persian Empire adopted their language as the international language of communication. And what happened is this was the language to speak if you wanted to do anything. This was the English. You had to, if you wanted to be somebody, you had to learn to read and write in Aramaic because that's what communication and business was done in. And slowly Aramaic took over and people were speaking Aramaic. There's good evidence that Jesus, for example, didn't speak Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic. But
you want to go into what some of that evidence is, or maybe we'll come back to that.
Well, the best part, there are little tidbits, but the best thing is when as he dies, there's a quote of Jesus, what he says when he died, or just before he died. And he's quoting from the Bible and saying, God, why have you forsaken me? And now we don't have the original, we don't have a recording, obviously, but the way that the Greek translation appears, it appears that he was, the Greek translation seems to be translating the Aramaic.
Not just that, it quotes it in Aramaic. And Matthew and
that's
Luke.
Right. It quotes it in Aramaic. That's right. And everything's in Greek, that is in Aramaic. Yeah. So if Jesus was using Aramaic to speak to God and from the Bible, which is obviously in Hebrew, this is good indication that this would be the language he was using. If you can assume that anything from the New Testament has any relation to history, and I would think that that part, if anything, would be remembered, because I don't think that would be something early Christians would invent. Like
there's something called the argument from embarrassment, that if you're going to make up a figure in history, he's going to raise up an army of supermen and defeat the Romans, not get crucified, right? So
like why would you invent that? Why would you say that Jesus had this moment where he's like asking God why?
It also doesn't sound like something that would have been made up in the 4th century, because by then you have the Trinity doctrine, and reconciling that particular scene with the Trinity. People have written whole books to do that, and you could, if you believe in that, guys, fine. But if you're starting out to invent something, you invent something that's theologically consistent, right? Or it's easier to explain. So, all right, go on.
So that part seems to me one of the most authentic parts in the Bible.
Okay.
And assuming that this is, whoever wrote this actually recording something about Jesus, he seems to be speaking Aramaic. Okay. But also when we find, and we don't find, there's hardly any inscriptions. But when we do, a lot of them are in Aramaic. And so anyways, there is people speaking Hebrew, there are people speaking Aramaic. It's a mishmash of languages. Even those people who do speak Aramaic, if they're Jewish, they're still reading the Bible, probably in Hebrew, at least in the earlier periods. No, also in later periods. And gradually...
until this very day, right? You have Jews in Uzbekistan up until 1991 who are still... But go ahead. They were still reading Hebrew.
So gradually, the people who speak Hebrew, everyone is praying in Hebrew, reading the Bible in Hebrew, but the people who raise their children in Hebrew and tell them to do their homework in Hebrew and argue with people at the supermarket in Hebrew, those are fewer and fewer, and they're probably the poor, uneducated, the lowliest people. And
so let me here, this is counterintuitive for a lot of people. We assume, or some people would assume, that the more languages you speak, you have the money to afford an education, so you're a higher socioeconomic status. And what you're saying is that actually the poor people out in some village in Judea or in the Galilee, they might have preserved Hebrew longer than the intellectual elite in the big cities. That's what you're saying, basically, right?
Possibly, although maybe the very high people, like at the highest levels, they would also speak Greek in addition to to the Aramaic. But yeah, it means your family made the switch earlier. Your family made the switch earlier to Aramaic. You already have a higher socioeconomic status. Okay. You're in the city and not in the town. We have a bit of this in rabbinic literature of this process of dying. We have this story about the rabbis at the court of Rabbi Judah the Prince. They don't know what I think it's metateh. Broom, they have the word for broom. They don't know what it means. But one of the maids of Rabbi Judah the Prince, she's able to tell them what it means. They're getting some lost language.
She actually doesn't tell them what it means. They overhear her speaking to her subordinate, and they're okay. We hear it being used. That's beautiful. We hear it being used in a practical sense. So that's interesting, Matatek, because that's a verse in Isaiah. What I find even more interesting is they didn't know what this other word meant, l'serugin, which is a word that doesn't appear in the Tanakh. It only appears in the oral law. And so they were citing these traditions about certain laws, right? And it says if you do something l'serugin, it's talking about reading the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, l'serugin, right? Whatever that means. They didn't know what it meant until they heard the maidservant use that word in speech. And they're like, oh, it means intermittently, or switching back and forth. So that's really interesting, because that's not them trying to interpret a verse from the Bible. It's something that was authored, I don't know when, but sometime before Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, right? And they're hearing a woman who's still, right, and so she's a maidservant. She's, like you said, the lowest socioeconomic status, or one of the lowest. and she's still using Hebrew as a living language. So now we're in the early 3rd century. How do we go from that to Hebrew being a dead language?
So this is already that's the cusp of it. When that languages die, and languages die every year, we have languages dying. Yeah. It's these old maids that still like speak with their sister, and they grew up with this language, and they happen to be the last 2 people who speak it. So we don't know exactly when this happened, when the last native speaker died. Eliezer ben Yehuda, father of modern Hebrew, actually writes a long article about this. It appears in the introduction to his big dictionary. But somewhere around that period, we don't know exactly where or when, the last person who spoke it as a native language died. So in that sense, Hebrew died around the time of the Mishnah, say the 3rd century. Could be the 4th century, could be earlier. Based on that story with the broom, it gives us the idea that apparently there were people still speaking there. But it's not okay. So it's not a day-to-day language, but it's not that it died. There's Diglossia, I think that's how you say it in English, use of 2 languages for different aspects of your life. This is, if you think about medieval, early modern Europe with the use of Latin. So people are speaking German, French, or whatever, but when you write a book or read a book or appear in a court or do something important, or not important, you do it in Latin. So you use Latin. It's an important language aspect of your life. You read in Latin, you write in Latin, you write letters in Latin. But that's not the language you speak with your wife or your servants. So there's a use of 2 languages. This is very common to this day in the Arab world.
Tell us about that. I find that so fascinating.
So there isn't a language called Arabic. There's no Arabic.
I want to stop for a second. There's no language called Arabic. That's what you just said.
Yeah. So we think for us Westerners or whatever Israelis are, there's Arabic and English and French, and all those are equivalent. But there really isn't an Arabic. There's a lot of Arabics. So in different countries in the Arab world, there's a different Arabic spoken. So there's Iraqi Arabic, there's Egyptian Arabic, Palestinian Arabic, which is very similar to Lebanese and Syrian Arabic, and then there's Moroccan Arabic, and all these are different languages, very different languages. The difference between Moroccan Arabic and Iraqi Arabic is more than the difference between Portuguese and Italian, which we definitely think of as different languages. Now, Portuguese and Italian are similar. They're both descendant of Latin, and there's a lot of similarities, but we definitely don't think of them as dialects. These are different languages. And the same is true about the different dialects of Arabic, different Arabics. You need different vocabulary, different grammar in some senses. It's a very different language. But that's the language that people speak to each other on the street, that people speak to their children. This is not the real Arabic. When they go to school and they learn grammar, they're not learning about the language they speak. That's a lowly language that there's no point in even discussing. It's just what we talk. The real Arabic, and this is what they learn in school, because they don't learn it from home. They have to learn Arabic in school. This is literary Arabic, and this is an international language. This is the language not only that all the books are published in, but also when you're listening to the radio, people are speaking in this literary Arabic, or when you're watching a movie or a TV show, for the most part, they're speaking this literary Arabic.
So you're saying is most Arabs actually speak 2 languages, their local language, Amia, and then the official language, Fusha. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly it.
So and that's a mind-blowing concept to an American English speaker until you think about African American English. So if you grow up in certain poor neighborhoods, there's a language you speak to your friends, and then when you, and let's say you're go to university, you're not going to speak that language at university usually. You certainly won't write your paper in that language that you speak to your friends back in the neighborhood, right? So it's too so, and there we got to be really careful because people will say, oh, that I don't even know what they'll say, right? Like there's some political incorrectness here, but the reality is what they're speaking in that neighborhood is a dialect unto itself, or maybe its own language with its own internal rules. And if I try to imitate it, I'm going to sound like an idiot because that's not how they actually talk, because I don't know what the rules are, right? So we think of it as, oh, they speak badly or they speak poorly or they're uneducated. No, they just speak a different language. And they have to learn a second language to go to university, right? And so I remember at Hebrew University, I had a class in Arabic literature. We read about the satanic verses, among other things. And one of the students raised his hand and starts asking a question in his dialect of Amia, of Palestinian Arabic. And the teacher said, you can either ask in Hebrew or in Fusha. And he said, why? What's wrong with my language? He said, when they allow your language at the university in Riyadh, I'll allow it here in my classroom, right? Because you would not speak the local dialect of Arabic that you speak on the street in Riyadh at the university. You're going to speak the official language. All right, so Arabic has that. And what I think you're saying is that in ancient times, Jews knew Hebrew and they knew whatever their local language was. That's where we're going.
Exactly. And their local language, and really this depends on place and time, but really what happened is there were two languages in each community. There was the local language, which really wasn't. There was a Jewish dialect of that area. So there's different Italians. There are different forms of Italian, Jewish Italian, but the Jewish Italian spoken in Venice, the Jewish Italian spoken, because only very recently is there an Italian. Italian is also as many dialects.
Arguably, there actually isn't even an Italian now, right? So if you go to southern Italy,
the Florence dialect to a certain extent became the standard Italian, and the other dialects, while they may exist, they're.
But if you go to the market in Sicily and Palermo, they're still speaking something different than what's spoken on the news that night, right? And
probably this is all a matter of degrees, but the differences used to be probably much more significant than they are today. Once again, this is not my field of expertise, but what happened is there's different like Jewish versions of the local language. People speak their local dialect, and they speak Sfat Kodesh. Rather, they don't speak it, they know how to read and talk in it and pray in it. Now, Sfat Kodesh, this is like the holy language. This is not Hebrew. This is Hebrew and Aramaic, because unless you're a child or an idiot, you're not studying the Torah. A real Jewish man is studying the Talmud.
That's that's going to be quotable there. Unless you're a child or an idiot, you're not studying. You mean you're not just studying the Torah? You're also studying. What else are you studying? Tell the audience, because they may not know.
Well, you start off with the Torah, you go on to the Mishnah, and then you go to the Talmud, and the Talmud is a sea, which you can swim in forever, and the size is huge, but also there's even the text of the Talmud, which is massive in itself, is only a small part of it, because the Jewish bookshelf is all a commentary on the Talmud. There's books and commentaries written on the Talmud itself. So if you're studying the Talmud, you might not necessarily be studying the Talmud itself, but you're studying a commentary on, or a commentary on the Talmud, and etc. So that's where Jewish study has gone. It's mostly concerns the revelation that's hidden inside the Talmud. That's where we get our laws, because
the revelation hidden inside the Talmud. Wow, we have to unpack that. But let's save that for the second half if you have time.
Okay, sure.
So you're saying that the Jews, let's say in Tiberias, in the 3rd or 4th century CE or AD, they're speaking What are they speaking? Let's ask that question.
Which century?
Fourth century. Let's say
Okay,
fourth
so the
century.
fourth century, they're speaking Aramaic. They're speaking Aramaic. That's why the Talmud is written, the Jerusalem Talmud in this case, is written in Aramaic. That's their language. That's also the language of their neighbors, unless they are speaking Greek. But their poorer neighbors, Jews, non-Jews, are speaking Aramaic, and they're the well-to-do Romans, which they are speaking Greek, and maybe some well-to-do Jews. But they are praying in Hebrew, probably. We have some difficulty understanding. We do not really know when we find synagogues from that period, they do not conform with the synagogue, with rabbinic Judaism. In other words, it seems, this is off topic here with language we're talking about, but I recently went to Sepphoris and Tzipori in Hebrew. This is a city near Nazareth, and it was an important city in the Galilee. Rabbi Judah the Prince lived there for a time. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to be good for his health. So the rabbis are living in this city, okay? And
he's the author of the Mishnah, for those who...
He's the author of the Mishnah, the most important rabbi, according to my understanding. He is the first rabbi, the founder of rabbinic Judaism.
Oh, wow.
That's
we'll talk about that later.
Arguable, but that's what I write in my book.
Okay.
So, and he's called Rabbi. That's simply rabbi. So you would say, oh, this is like Grand Central rabbinic Judaism. Everyone must be rabbinic Judaism. But then we uncovered the synagogue there. It's later, like 200, 300 years later. But we have the synagogue there, and you can even have a bar mitzvah there.
Oh, even today? Okay.
Even today, they set it up, and they have bar mitzvahs there. And it's beautiful, and it's just Mosaic, and the text in Hebrew, and it's clearly no question that it is a synagogue. But in the center of the Mosaic, which is the floor, the center of the synagogue, there's a zodiac, or the 12 signs of the zodiac. And in the middle, there is a portrait of God, stylized as the sun god on a chariot, the way they used to, at the time would draw sun gods. And,
I'm pulling up the photo to see. So we have Helios riding a quadriga or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, there you go. Yep, we'll throw that up on the screen there, right? So it's the, all right. So we've got, and you can't mistake that as the sun. It's actually a sun with rays coming out of it. Okay. So in the middle of a synagogue, you have a sun god. So, all right. So there's a disconnect between what we think of as what should have been in Judaism 2,000, or not 2,000 years ago, 1,600 years ago. But at the same time, I'm looking at this mosaic, and we see Sagittarius is Keshet or Kashat, and then we have Kislev, right? So we have these Hebrew words.
There's Hebrew words, there's Hebrew text. These are Jews.
This is a Jewish place with writing in Hebrew. There's also some Greek writing, but okay.
Now, so these weren't rabbinic Judaism people. These were not the Judaism we know from the Mishnah and the Talmud.
Or maybe they were. Meaning maybe. I don't know. Give me your position on it.
I can't see any of the rabbis mentioned in the Talmud saying that this is okay. I mean, the Bible is pretty explicit. You can't. I can't. Also, there's no rabbinic text here. We have in Rehov. We find rabbinic text. So the people who were in that synagogue that was found in Rehov near Beit Shan, so those apparently were like rabbis whose traditions come or related to the Talmud and the Mishnah and the kind of Judaism we are descended from. But the Judaism was huge in Hellenistic times and Roman times. There were apparently millions of Jews. and they were, Hellenistic Judaism. They were the Judaism similar to what we find in his name, Philo of Alexandria.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with what we think of as Judaism. And we only have a tiny window to that Judaism because we only have the writings of Philo. And there's millions of these people, and we find synagogues throughout the Roman world. And these are completely different forms of Judaism. They might have been completely disparate from one another. They had their own, we don't know, they probably read the Bible in its Greek form, the Septuagint. It's completely different from all we know. And they just died out. There's nothing left of that Judaism.
Did they die out, or were they assimilated into rabbinical Judaism, right? In other words,
it's probably a combination of both. In other words,
or maybe they converted to Christianity or Islam, right? We don't know, I guess, right?
It's likely a combination of all those things. There were in late antiquity, there were serious disasters that most of the people in the Mediterranean world died. So a bulk of them died in those disasters. There was probably a volcano eruption, the arrival of the Black Death, the sun was blotted out, crop failure.
So all right, I want to go back to the language thing. So I think what you're saying with all this is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that they had Diglossia, you called it. They're speaking Greek or Aramaic or some other language, but Hebrew is continuing to be used as a liturgical language. And what is that different from, let's say, cuneiform, which is a language that really died and nobody spoke up until the nobody spoke even then, but it wasn't deciphered until the 19th century. And that was indirectly based on a whole chain of, right, they had modern Persian, which was used to decipher Old Persian, which was then used in a triliteral inscription to decipher the ancient cuneiform, right? But that Hebrew was never like that it completely died out, right? It wasn't a native language, but it was still used.
It was alive in the day-to-day life of at least men, Jewish men for generations, because they used it in their prayer and in their study and when writing letters and when writing books. In other words, it existed as like an intellectual language, but not the day-to-day language. But even more than that, the words in Hebrew, they remained alive inside the local languages, the Jewish languages. Okay. And for example, and this is the most important Jewish language, Yiddish, which means Jewish, the Jewish language, which was the language of the Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews of Eastern Europe. We could talk about why those people are important. Other people are obviously important too. But for historical purposes, they are the most important group to understand modern Judaism. And those people,
that's quite a statement, but all right, let's say that for a different discussion.
It's just, okay, I need to clarify because I'm going to get crucified here. So it's not that these are more important people, but at the turn of the 20th century, and when the modern period began, 9 out of 10 Jews in the world were Ashkenazi Jews living in the Pale of Settlement, where Ukraine, Poland, or they already migrated to America, or they were from there but migrated to France and Germany. But nearly all the Jews in the world were Yiddish-speaking or descendants of Yiddish-speaking Jews. Nearly all the Jews who settled in Palestine and founded the state of Israel, nearly all of them came from there. Zionism happened there. It didn't happen in Morocco, which had a substantial number of Jews, but it's only because there were so many of them. There were millions of there, and then there were a few thousands in other communities.
So today, I think over 50% of the population of Israel is said to be of Mizrahi or so-called Sephardic. So how did that happen that you go from 90% to 50%?
Now it's not so significant.
Okay.
But that happened because there was a systematic murder of those Jews in the Holocaust. And the ones that didn't migrate to Israel and didn't migrate to America, most of American Jews are Ashkenazi. I think it is around 90% there. So in Israel,
it's less now because of all the people who've left Israel. But when I was growing up in Chicago, it was rare to encounter a Sephardic Jew. Like it was a noteworthy event. Like, oh, there's 30 kids in my class, and one of them is a Sephardi, and they do this different thing, and yeah.
In Montreal, where my family comes from, or my mother's side, it's more common because it's French-speaking kind of country.
So they came from North Africa.
So North African Jews could immigrate there, and they spoke French, so it was more convenient. But even
you have
there,
to figure what kind of Jew wants to go to a cold place like Chicago. Somebody who comes from a northern climate anyway. So maybe that was a self-selecting group, right? All right. So Israel today is something like 50% non-Ashkenazi, but you're saying that's mostly because of the Holocaust.
So the people who immigrated early to Israel, the founders of the state of Israel, these are the people involved in the reviving of the Hebrew language, the people founding the kibbutzim in Tel Aviv, and all the chalutzim, what you think of as Zionism.
Pioneers,
The pioneers, the chalutzim. The founding fathers, not only the leaders of the country, but also the people working in the factories and working in the farms and fighting in the early IDF and what was before the IDF. Those are by far Ashkenazi Jews coming from Eastern Europe.
Okay.
That's where Zionism happened. That's where most Jews lived. It's not because why is this the case? There were much more Jews there. Most Jews weren't Zionists. Most Jews either stayed there, were part of the Bund, or they migrated to America. A small minority. There were so many Jews there that even when a tiny minority are crazy enough to think that they can go and live in Palestine and start their own country, that was enough to actually succeed in doing that. There were smaller numbers in other places. Say Morocco, which had one of the biggest communities outside of Ashkenaz, but they didn't really have nationalism developed there. The ideas of nationalism and Zionism is a form of nationalism, a Jewish nationalism, were later to appear there. And it just didn't happen there. That's not where it happened. That Jewish community did migrate to Israel, but they migrated 10, 20 years later during the 50s and even the 60s. So that's why when we talk about the effect, there's the Arabic that they spoke, Jewish Moroccan Arabic. If they would have been the people who revived the Hebrew language, then we would see a lot of effect of that form of Arabic on the Hebrew language.
It just so happens the current head of the Academy of the Hebrew Language, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it Aharon Maman, who is a Moroccan Jew,
and the one before that,
Moshe Balashel was Moroccan.
Moshe Balashel. So this is not what's it called? Not to say, and there are a significant, very important in the group of Ben Yehuda, who was Ashkenazi. There were very important non-Ashkenazi leaders in that group. But so I don't want to exclude anyone, but it is a historical fact that these are the people who did it. So that's why there is an enormous effect of Yiddish on modern Hebrew.
This brings us to Yiddish. So we were talking about the directions, north, south, east, west.
Exactly. So why do we use these particular words? Zafon, Doron, Mizrach, Marav, and not Yama, Teman, and all these other options that we could have used from the Bible, because those were the words in Yiddish. And Yiddish is this, it's full of Hebrew words. It's
what percent? I don't know Yiddish. Do you know? What percentage of Hebrew words? I know like some words too.
And I don't know. It's impossible to speak in percentages of words.
Okay.
I've been trying to do that with Hebrew, like modern Hebrew, with dictionaries. Like it's very difficult.
So let me ask this. So when my great grandfather was speaking Yiddish in Lithuania, in Vilna, in 1905, he probably couldn't go through a day going. And I'm asking this as a question, really. Could he go through a day going to the market or the whatever he was doing without speaking Hebrew words? That's really
No, that would be a complete. He couldn't
not
carry a
possible.
conversation.
Okay.
Maybe a few sentences, but Hebrew is Yiddish is full of Hebrew words and very basic words. Maybe I'll give an example. I'm not fluent in Yiddish or anything, but okay. We were just talking about the north, south, east, and west. So you would say you would use the Hebrew words, von Dorom, Mizrach, Marav.
So in other words, Hebrew had a bunch of different words for north, but the word that modern Hebrew chose was the influence of Yiddish. That Yiddish had preserved this Hebrew word. Is that what you're saying?
The way to see it is really modern Hebrew adopted the Yiddish word for north, south, east,
which happened to be a Hebrew word.
This happened to be a Hebrew word. Now, when the people who revived the Hebrew language, they were aware of this and then maybe a little embarrassed of this. But what they were really doing, they were not exactly reviving the Hebrew language from scratch, because that is something impossible to do. What they were doing really is they were taking Yiddish, and whenever there was a non-Hebrew word in Yiddish, they looked and replaced it with a word in a Hebrew word. So they were going through this process of cleaning Yiddish of the non-Hebrew words in it. So if the word was Hebrew, we can keep that.
I never heard it described that way. What's an example of a Yiddish word that's Germanic or Slavic that's used in modern Hebrew?
So they're exceedingly rare, because what they were doing, what they were trying to do is quash those words. Now, like if there was a word like that, they would get rid of it. There's an exception. If the word, and we have these discussions that are written down. If the word is international, in other words, they don't really talk about the language they're speaking. They're speaking amongst each other in Yiddish, but they don't. The protocol is written in Hebrew, and they're not acknowledging, because they're embarrassed about the fact that they're speaking Yiddish.
Okay.
So they say international words we don't have to replace. Now, what do they mean by that?
Yeah, what's an international word?
If Yiddish uses a word and it's international, if also the other languages are using it, so that's an okay word. So say
I don't know, like chemia or something like that. Would that be an example?
Chemia, chemistry. Okay. So you would have to replace a word like that, but they use it also in Russian and also in what's it called? So that's an okay international word.
Okay.
Or let's say
it's also something that's inherently modern, right? In other words, they didn't have chemistry in the time of the Talmud, so
that doesn't matter, because also other modern things. We replaced electricity. We replaced with chashmal, which is a biblical word.
Okay.
So they will replace everything. But if it's an international word, they would go out of their way they would say, okay, that's okay.
Or università, maybe it would be.
Università. Ben Yehuda actually did do Michlala, that was supposed to replace università, but now it's a college. But now it's used for college, but it was supposed to be for university. But there's 1,000 of them, like all these words that end with tia, like where we have in English shin, it's tia in Hebrew, and those are just the Yiddish word. Okay. Now the reason those made the cut is they said, okay, those are international words. They use them also in English, also in French. So we'll continue. Those are okay. It's not like it's proper. Also, that's a telephone, telegraph, stuff like that.
Modern. And not for lack of trying, right? Ben Yehuda made a word for telephone, just nobody uses it.
The Sachachok is, I don't think it's him actually, but
somebody
made up a word, and that never really caught on. But other things, say many other modern inventions, planes, cars, have in Hebrew words. Now, I said there's very few, but I think it's worth like hammering home. So there's this word Davka. Davka is this is another word that Hebrew borrowed from Yiddish. And once again, it stayed because there was no problem in keeping it, because it wasn't a Hebrew word. It was a Lashon Kodesh word. It was from Aramaic.
Mhm.
So there's Davka. It's like a technical term in the Talmud. It means that we're not discussing. It's not only particularly to one subject, but it's also applicable to other forms, like other subjects, and also in cases where we're talking about a thing. So we're talking about the thing literally, Davka, or not literally. For example, there's a part in the Talmud they're discussing. It says in the Bible that they're going to Sukkota. And the rabbis, this is actually not in the Talmud, I think it's in one of the Midrashim. And the rabbis are saying the Sukkot that they're in, the children of Israel, Sukkot are like these temporary huts, yeah? So
from the Feast of Booths.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the children of Israel, when it says in the Bible in this particular verse that they are in booths, are we talking about booths like Sukkot, like in Sukkot, or is it really a metaphor for the Spirit of God taking them through something like some kind of fanciful, supernatural kind of boost, and then it's like boost, but not real boost. So you can use the word Davka, and they use the word Davka when you say Davka Sukkot. It's the literally actual Sukkot.
So the rough translation is specifically, right? Or
it could be. I would use literally. It's literally, literally a sukkah. Like I'm literally
it's
talking.
Mamash literally. See what I did there.
Yeah, Mamash is another good example.
We'll talk about that next. All right.
So it's a what's important is it's a technical term used in the Talmud. Now, since all these Ashkenazi Jews, and not only Ashkenazi Jews, but we're talking about Yiddish, we're studying the Talmud, and it's a common term. This word entered into Yiddish, and it has a different meaning somewhat. It has all kinds of meanings, okay, in Yiddish. I'll give some of them. There are, you can
actually, before you do that, I just want people to understand this word davka, or I grew up saying it Davka, which you can talk about the difference there. It really is an important concept in like Yiddish speaking culture, right? Like I'm a person who didn't know more than a dozen words of Yiddish, and I knew the word Davka, and it's a word that I would not have necessarily realized was even not English until I reached a certain age, just because I was immersed with words like Davka and chutzpah and mamish, and words like these are words that were so deeply ingrained in my upbringing. And my father didn't speak Yiddish. My mother spoke. She could understand it, and she spoke a little bit, or she does still speak a little bit. My grandmother, that was her native tongue, right? So it's not just some obscure word, and it's an important concept in modern Israeli culture, I would say as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Lasot Davka, to do Davka.
So,
all right. So tell us about Davka.
So it has several uses. It's not perfectly translatable. So you said Lasot Davka. One of the ways you use it is when you say somebody Lasot Davka, does Davka, or when you say he's going to school. Okay, so somebody's going to school. He's going to school Davka. You're saying he's doing it out of spite. He's doing it to make you angry, or like he's doing it on purpose to hurt somebody, or to see. So that's what Davka does when it's added to the end of a sentence. But you can also use it completely differently when you put it inside a sentence. And when you say, I like eating cheese, okay? So you can say, Davka, I like eating cheese, and then it's me that likes eating cheese rather than the other people. These other people, they don't like eating cheese. It's me that likes eating cheese. Or if I put the Davka before the word cheese, so it's I like eating cheese, not these other foods. It's Davka, the cheese I like to eat. So
Wow.
it has this specifying, but not only saying specifically, it's saying not the others. And you can use it in any sentence. You can add it. And the
Yeah.
thing before you put it before, you're saying that that thing is true while other things aren't true. It's a great way how mother-in-laws insult in a subtle and a very painful way. This is a Jewish mothers-in-laws have been doing this for generations. Your daughter-in-law made a beautiful cake and it's delicious, and you really enjoyed the meal and the cake. It's so good. And you say, "Zo dafka uvga meula." It conveys that you're saying that the cake is excellent. But by using dafka, it's like surprising that the cake is excellent. I wouldn't have expected that this cake would be good, but this one actually is.
It's like saying, this is actually good, right? So
Yeah.
that would be the translation here, I think. So
Yeah.
wow, so that's a very versatile word, and it's a word that's used quite regularly, right? It's not like some obscure word. Right?
All the time. It's all the time in Yiddish and all the time in Hebrew. And the thing is, it's in Hebrew. Now, Hebrew could have adopted the word straight from the Talmud and used it the way it's in the Talmud.
Yeah.
But we don't use it that way. We use it exactly in the same way that it's used in Yiddish. Not
We
only
have to
that,
use it in the way that it's used in Yiddish.
Dafka the way in Yiddish, and exactly, and not like the way it's in the Talmud. Now, and we also Dafka pronounce it the way they pronounce it in Yiddish. We say Dafka and not Davka. It's written, it's still spelled today in Hebrew.
And nobody says Davka. They all say, I mean,
you could say some hypercorrect, and if you're speaking in a formal way, or you're very like maybe on TV, you would say you're supposed to say Davka with the stress at the end of the word. But people say in regular speech. I haven't counted in recordings and everything, but everyone says Dafka. And Davka is now there's a like linguistic explanation for this. This is a partial assimilation. This is a partial assimilation. What happened is there's different qualities of a consonant. So V sound of V, that's a voiced consonant, as opposed to and it comes with a pair. An unvoiced version of that is a F. Okay. There's another one will be helpful to understand what we're talking about is voice. We have Va and Fa. Okay, so we have K and G. Okay, so the voiced is the G and the non-voiced is the K. There's like a vibration-y-ness of the consonant, which is the voiced quality. So there's some stickiness of between consonants when they're placed together in quick. You sometimes they become similar to each other. If there's a voice consonant before or after, the consonant before or after will become voiced, even though it's not supposed to be voiced, or the opposite can happen. In this case, the K in Davka, so it's unvoiced, and while the V sound that was before is voiced. So people anticipating in their mind, anticipating that they're going to need to make an unvoiced K in a second, or in a fraction of a second, they also unvoice the sound before. And instead of saying Davka, they say Dafka. And eventually, this process happens over time. And it's not that this is happening every time we say the word. It's not because it's unvoiced or not voiced. This rule of unvoicing, but this assimilation in this case, isn't active in modern Hebrew. It only appears in words that Hebrew adopted from Yiddish. In other words, for example, Safta. Safta, grandma, is spelled as if it's supposed to be savta. But again, with the voice v, same, but we pronounce it safta because again, the ta, that's unvoiced consonant, and it backwards partially assimilated.
And both examples you gave are Aramaic words that were adopted into Yiddish, right? Savta is also there. So are there examples that the word is an original Hebrew word?
Sure. I mean, I wonder if mamash, because mamash is in Hebrew, but it probably comes from Aramaic. I don't think it appears in the Bible. I think it is rabbinic. I mean, we talked about Safon and Darom, and those are.
No, I mean, is there an example where you have that partial assimilation of the V into an F? That's what I'm asking.
In modern Hebrew, this happening.
Where it doesn't come. I mean, do they all come from Aramaic? All those like Safta and Davka, are they all Aramaic words, or are there examples?
I'd be hard pressed to find more examples of this that phenomenon.
Okay. So there's only two that you can think of. Okay.
Yeah. So their vocabulary has a lot of Hebrew words, and those words remain.
By the way, this happens in English. We say wife and wives, right? So that's a similar. I mean, it's the same linguistic phenomenon.
The same consonants. Is it assimilation? Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. In any event, so you said there's a bunch of words that come into modern Hebrew from Yiddish, but it's more complex than that. Basically, they were trying to take Yiddish and Hebraize it, is what you're really saying.
Because the basic grammar of Hebrew, the sentence structure, it's very Yiddish. Okay, the backbone is Yiddish. The way we turns of phrases. Also, there's a lot of phrases like Hebrew phrases that we say, or Aramaic phrases. We say. That means a baker does not give his opinion on the quality of his dough. It's a way to say, somebody else should comment. You shouldn't comment.
Yeah, but does that come from, and I don't know the answer here, does that come from Yiddish, or does that come from like the Talmud?
Yeah, so this would be used in Yiddish. Nearly all the phrases.
No, but what I'm asking is it originally Yiddish? Is it a German phrase, a Germanic phrase that's now translated into Hebrew, or it's?
I think this is from rabbinic literature, I believe.
Okay, right. And as a contrast, you bring the example in one of your videos of to close your fly, which that actually is a Germanic phrase now translated into Hebrew, right? Meaning your zip of your pants, right?
Yeah, although in the comments to that, people have been telling me that in Lebanese Arabic they use it, in French they use something similar, in Brazil they use something similar, and in Turkish they use something similar, which I was unaware of. So it seems like it's almost international. I would assume, since these people are all mother tongue Yiddish speakers, that they would take it from Yiddish. But I cannot be completely confident about that anymore, because it seems that everywhere around the world, people say the same thing. Apparently,
so just to explain to let's back up. So the modern Hebrew word for a fly, which is the thing you zip up at the front of a man's pants. Well, tell us about that. Not the
zipper, the opening itself, the fly.
Opening itself. Okay, so tell us about that. Because I've seen the video, most people haven't. So tell us that story.
So we have flies. Hebrew doesn't have a word for that. I don't know where the English word for fly came from. It couldn't be that ancient because people didn't have flies in ancient times. So there's no word for this. But what there is once you see somebody and their fly is open, you say, which literally means close either close your store or your store is open. Now, this is a phrase used in Yiddish, and it turns out in many languages. When you see somebody, in English we would say XYZ, or XYZ, if you're American.
Examine your zipper.
Examine your zipper. But apparently in many languages, you say, oh, you left your store open, you should close your store. I think there's like a sexual connotation here, as if the wares...
I'm not sure. I think it comes from people had these little kiosks, and the store was like, you would open up like a little awning, and that was the store, right? So You're
Yeah,
looking
but
now into the.
it
Well, I
implied
don't know.
that your wares are
Oh,
your
maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
All right,
everyone can see your wares.
but the point is they didn't use the word chanus or something like this in Yiddish, which is the Hebrew word for store, chanut, right? I'm asking, right? Didn't they use a
They
Germanic word?
used the German word, right?
Okay, that was what I was asking.
Uh, something like that.
Okay.
And so this was translated. In other words, these people, once again, we're going back to the how the Hebrew was born. So suddenly, all these people from Eastern Europe were moving to Palestine.
Yeah.
People often think of the end of the 19th century, like Ben Yehuda figures, but
Yes.
really, that's like a prequel to the story because in 1900 there were a handful of people that were speaking Hebrew, a few crazy families living in Jerusalem that were like, we're speaking, it's sort of like people raising their family in Klingon. Now,
Okay.
there are some people that could do that. There's like attempts with Cornish in England, but there's even the 1900 Encyclopedia Britannica and their article of about Hebrew. So it gives a scholarly thing about the Hebrew language, and at the end they say currently in Palestine there are some people trying to revive the Hebrew language, but this is doomed to fail, and it's like
Does it really say that? That's
crazy
awesome.
people, and it's like he doesn't treat it at all like seriously.
Okay.
And it wasn't serious at this point. But what happened is 20 years later, at the end of World War I, when an international agreement said that Palestine will become the land of the Jews, at that point, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands eventually of Jews moved from Eastern Europe and settled in Palestine. And that concerted effort between the end of World War I and the founding of the state, that is the nation building period. And at that point, we have thousands of Jews coming from Eastern Europe, or mostly from Eastern Europe, settling in towns and cities. And those people are suddenly, most of them speak Yiddish, and they suddenly are forced to speak Hebrew. So
why are they forced? And it's a real question. I don't know the answer. Like, in other words, if you go to the Walmart down the street from my house and you go to ask for something, you better go with Google Dictionary. I'm not trying to be funny. Yeah. And you may have to pull up literally Arabic. You might have to pull up Spanish. If you want to know where the cold medicine is, and you ask in English, and this literally has happened to me. I literally had to pull up on my phone and look up the Arabic word for cold medicine, and then immediately I was okay. It's with hands, it's over there. So why were they forced? That's my question, right? Because you could live in another country and never learn the language. My great-grandfather, I don't know that he spoke English to the day he died, right? He lived in America for 30 years.
I think these people are not like immigrants. They're not people moving to a different country to build a better life for themselves or their children. These are people who are moved to, like, they have a historic purpose. They're a part of an international movement. They're living in history. They're reviving a ancient.
So it's ideologically motivated, is I think what you're saying.
By 100%. These are because
so they Davka don't want to speak Yiddish. They want to speak Hebrew.
Exactly. They're very aware of this. They're doing something historical. Like the people who were looking for a better life, they moved to America. The people who moved to Palestine, those are the crazy people who were really feeling a part of a movement of Zionism. It was these are amazing.
All right. Wow, absolutely fast. Any final words that you want to share with the audience?
No, I very much enjoyed this, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.